I learned to read property deeds the way other people read faces. 43 pages of legal language that would put most folks to sleep? I could scan in 11 minutes and tell you exactly who owned what, who owed whom, and where someone was trying to slip a fraudulent clause past an overworked clerk. That skill kept a roof over my children's heads after my husband died. That skill bought Gerald his first car, paid for his business school, and eventually purchased the house where he lives today with a woman who thinks I'm too stupid to understand what she's doing. My name is Ruth Okonkwo Callahan. I'm 69 years old. I spent 38 years as a title insurance examiner in Manhattan, working my way up from night receptionist while my babies slept in the break room. My husband Samuel died of a heart attack when Gerald was 14 and Paula was 11. One day, he was fixing the kitchen cabinet that always stuck. The next day, I was picking out his casket and trying to explain to two children why their father wasn't coming home. I raised them alone. I worked the night shift so I could be home when they got back from school. I studied for my examiner's license at 3 a.m, drinking instant coffee that tasted like dirt, reading real estate law textbooks while my feet throbbed from 8 hours standing at the reception desk. When I finally passed the exam and got promoted, Paula cried. Gerald said he was proud of me. He was 17 then. He still called me Mama. Samuel's ashes sit in an urn on my nightstand, dark blue ceramic with small gold stars, because he loved astronomy. Used to take the kids to the planetarium every month. I talk to that urn sometimes. Tell him about the grandchildren. Tell him Paula became a teacher like she always wanted. Tell him Gerald runs his own investment firm now, married to a woman who wears shoes that cost more than our first car. I don't tell Samuel what Vanessa said about him last Christmas. Some things the dead don't need to hear. The house Gerald lives in is worth about $900,000 now, maybe more with how Westchester real estate keeps climbing. Beautiful colonial with the white pillars and the perfect lawn. Gerald showed me pictures before they even put in an offer. He was so excited. Said it was exactly what he'd dreamed of. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, that open kitchen Vanessa wanted for entertaining. He asked me to help with the down payment. Called it a loan at first, then softened it to a gift. Said he'd pay me back when the business took off. I looked at my savings account, at the money I'd been building for 40 years. The money that was supposed to be my security. Then I looked at my son's face. At the hope there. I said yes. But I didn't say yes the way he thought I did. Gerald thinks I gave him $485,000 as a wedding present. What I actually did was purchase the house through a revocable grantor trust with myself as trustee and Gerald and Vanessa as conditional beneficiaries. The trust agreement runs 43 pages. I drafted it myself, had it reviewed by Josephine Adeyemi, the best estate attorney I know, and recorded it with the county clerk's office before I signed over a single dollar. Gerald signed every page. Vanessa signed every page. I don't think either of them read past page 2. Page 14, clause 14.3 subsection B, states that willful destruction or disposal of memorial items belonging to the settler's deceased spouse constitutes material breach of the trust conditions and triggers immediate reversion of all trust property to the settler's estate. I wrote that clause thinking about the urn, about the photo albums, about Samuel's fishing rods still in our garage, about his collection of astronomy books, about the things that prove a man existed. I wrote it thinking someday Gerald might have a wife who wanted to throw all that old stuff away to make room for her decorating ideas. I wrote it thinking I should protect what matters while I still could. I didn't know I was writing prophecy. The first time I noticed something changing was 3 months after the wedding. Gerald used to call me every Sunday morning at 9. We'd talk for an hour. He'd tell me about work, about the house projects, about whatever new restaurant Vanessa wanted to try. I'd tell him about the garden, about Paula's kids, about the book club I joined at the library. Then the calls started coming at 10, then 10:30. Then he'd text instead, saying Vanessa needed quiet time on Sunday mornings for her meditation. Then the texts got shorter. Then they came on Mondays, then every other week. I told myself newlyweds need space. I told myself I raised him to be attentive to his wife's needs. I told myself a lot of things that winter. In March, they changed the locks. I found out when I drove up to surprise them with Paula's birthday cake, the red velvet Samuel always made, the recipe I've perfected over 40 years. I stood on their porch with the cake carrier in my hands, watching through the window as Vanessa rearranged the living room furniture. I knocked. She saw me. She came to the door but didn't open it, just spoke through the glass. Security concerns, she said. The neighborhood had some break-ins. They were being careful. She'd have Gerald call me about getting a new key made. Gerald never called about the key. I drove home with that red velvet cake and ate a slice alone at my kitchen table. The icing was perfect. Samuel would have approved. I cried into the second slice and hated myself for it. What I didn't do was cause a scene. What I didn't do was demand anything. I've learned that demanding never works with people who've already decided you don't matter. I filed the incident away in my mind the way I used to file questionable property transfers. Started a mental folder labeled Gerald and Vanessa. Started paying attention in a different way. In June, I ran into Tom Matthews at the grocery store. Tom's son went to school with Gerald, played tennis at the same country club where Gerald's firm hosts client events. Tom asked how I was doing, said something polite about Gerald's business success. Then he said something else. He said he'd heard I used to work as a housekeeper. He said Gerald mentioned it at the club. He said it so carefully, like he was checking a fact, like he wanted to make sure he had it right. I stood there holding a cantaloupe and felt something crack inside my chest. I smiled at Tom. I said Gerald must have been confused, that I worked in title insurance for nearly 4 decades. I said it gracefully. I said it with the voice I use when I'm catching someone in a lie on a property deed and don't want them to know I've caught them yet. Tom looked embarrassed. He apologized. He said he must have misunderstood, but he didn't misunderstand. Gerald said it. My son told people I cleaned houses. My son with his business degree that I paid for, his first apartment deposit I covered. His car insurance I subsidized until he was 28. My son stood in a country club I helped him afford and told people his mother scrubbed toilets. I finished my grocery shopping. I drove home. I watered Samuel's rose bushes in the backyard, the ones he planted the year before he died. I pulled weeds until my knees ached and my hands were filthy. Then I went inside and opened my laptop and started making notes. Gerald called that night. It was Wednesday, not our usual schedule. But he called, asked how I was doing, asked about my blood pressure medication, asked if I needed anything. His voice was warm. His voice was the voice of a good son checking on his aging mother. I wanted to ask him about Tom Matthews. I wanted to ask him why he lied. Instead, I asked about Vanessa, about the house, about work. I listened to him talk. I listened for what he wasn't saying. He mentioned they were thinking about having me over for dinner soon. Maybe next month. Vanessa wanted to wait until the guest room renovation was finished. The guest room, where I used to stay when I visited, where Samuel's urn lived on the dresser because Gerald asked me to keep it there, said it made him feel like Dad was still part of the house. I said that sounded lovely. I said I looked forward to it. I said I loved him. He said he loved me too. I think he meant it the same way you mean it when you tell a stranger to have a nice day. Paula called me the next morning. She was crying. My daughter doesn't cry easily. She teaches 4th grade in the Bronx, deals with budget cuts and overcrowded classrooms and parents who scream at her during conferences. She's got spine, but she was crying. She said she went to pick up her kids from school and the office gave her trouble. They said she wasn't on the emergency contact list anymore. They had Ruth Callahan listed for her children last year, but someone called and had the name removed. They had Gerald's name. They had Vanessa's name. They didn't have mine. Paula asked who called. The secretary checked the notes. Vanessa called. Said there was a mistake in the records. Said Ruth Callahan was elderly and confused and shouldn't be contacted in emergencies. elderly and confused. I'm 69. I haven't been confused a day in my life. I can still recite property law precedents from cases I handled 20 years ago. I can tell you the exact date I closed on my townhouse, the exact interest rate on my mortgage, the exact wording of Clause 7 in the trust agreement I wrote for Gerald's house. Paula wanted to confront Gerald. I told her not to. I told her to add herself back to the contact list and let it go. She asked me why. I told her I was handling it. I wasn't handling anything yet. I was still collecting evidence. In August, Vanessa started posting photos online. She's always posting photos. The perfect life documented in filtered squares. But these were different. These showed boxes, garbage bags. The caption read, "Major decluttering project. Feels so good to clear out the negative energy." I recognized Samuel's fishing rods in one photo. They were leaning against the garage wall waiting to be thrown away. His tackle box beside them. The astronomy books I gave him for our 20th anniversary, stacked in a donation pile. The comments praised her. Everyone loved her minimalist aesthetic. Her commitment to living in the present. Her courage to let go of the past. I closed the app. I sat very still. I counted to 100 in Igbo, the way my mother taught me to do when I was angry. Then I counted to 100 in English. Then I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out the folder marked Gerald House Trust. I read all 43 pages again. I checked every clause. I confirmed every condition. I verified the recording number with the county clerk's website. Everything was exactly as I remembered. Then I called Josephine. Josephine Adeyemi is 71 years old and still works 60 hours a week handling estate cases. We met in night school in 1976, two Black women in a classroom full of men who thought we were secretaries. We studied together. We passed the bar exam together, though I went into title work and she went into probate law. We've been friends for 48 years. She knows how I think. She answered on the second ring. I told her I needed her to review a trust document I'd written 6 years ago. I told her I needed to understand my options. I didn't tell her why yet. She said she'd be at my house by 6. She arrived with her reading glasses and a legal pad. She read every word of the trust agreement while I made tea. When she finished, she looked at me over her glasses the way she used to look at opposing counsel when they'd made a mistake they didn't know about yet. She said it was the tightest trust document she'd seen in 40 years of practice. She said whoever wrote it understood exactly how to protect a settler's interests while maintaining beneficial flexibility. She said the memorial items clause was particularly clever because it was specific enough to be enforceable, but broad enough to cover any attempt to dispose of the deceased spouse's belongings. I told her I wrote it. She smiled. She said she knew. Then I told her about the fishing rods and the books, about the locks, about the housekeeper lie, about being removed from my grandchildren's emergency contacts, about Vanessa's posts. Josephine closed her legal pad. She asked if I'd spoken to Gerald about any of this. I said no. She asked why not. I said because I wanted to be sure before I acted. I said I spent 38 years catching fraud in property documents, and the first rule of catching fraud is to build your case completely before you confront anyone. She asked what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to wait and see how far it would go. I said I wanted to know if my son would stop this himself or if his wife would push him past the point of return. Josephine said that was risky. She said elder financial abuse cases usually got worse before they got better. She said she'd handled 300 of these cases, and every single time the family member being abused wanted to believe it wasn't really happening. I said I knew it was happening. I said I just wanted to be sure Gerald knew he was letting it happen. She asked if I wanted her to be ready to act. I said yes. She said she'd clear her schedule for whenever I needed her. That was August. I decided to wait until the holidays. Family shows its truth at the holidays. In September, Gerald called and asked me to co-sign some refinance papers. Said it was just a formality. Said the business was doing great, but the bank needed additional guarantees for a better interest rate. Said it would really help him out. I said I'd need to see the documents. He said he'd email them. He did. I opened the PDF at my kitchen table. 57 pages. I read every word. What Gerald called a simple refinance was actually a subordination agreement that would move my trust interest behind a new mortgage, effectively stripping my reversionary rights. If Gerald defaulted on the new loan, the bank would foreclose and my trust interest would evaporate. Even if he didn't default, the new mortgage terms would make it almost impossible for me to exercise my rights to reclaim the property. Someone helped him draft this. Someone who understood exactly what they were doing. I saved the PDF to 3 separate folders. I printed 2 copies, put one in my safe deposit box and one in the folder I was building. Then I called Gerald and said I needed to think about it. He said there was no rush, but the rate lock expired in 30 days. He said he understood if I didn't feel comfortable, that he didn't want to pressure me. His voice was gentle. His voice was the voice of a good son being patient with his elderly mother's hesitation. I said I just needed to review everything carefully. He said, of course. He said, take your time, Mom. I let the rate lock expire. Gerald called once to check. I said I was still reviewing it with my financial advisor. He sighed but didn't push. The subject disappeared. What appeared instead was a phone call from Marlene Torres. Marlene worked with me at the title company for 15 years before she retired. We still had lunch once a month. She called in October, voice tight. She said she heard something at a retirement party for one of our old colleagues. She said Richard Chen mentioned that his firm sometimes did title work for a Gerald Callahan, an investment advisor in Westchester. Richard said Gerald was sharp, good client, paid on time. Richard also mentioned quietly that Gerald had warned him about something. Gerald told Richard that his mother had a gambling problem, that she'd blown through her savings at Atlantic City, that she sometimes called his clients asking for money, claiming she'd done property work for them years ago and they owed her fees, that he wanted Richard to know in case I ever contacted the firm that they shouldn't give me any information or take my calls seriously. Marlene asked Richard why he was telling this story at a party. Richard said he felt bad about it, said he never believed it anyway because he remembered me from some industry conferences, remembered I had a reputation for being meticulous, but Gerald had been very convincing, very concerned. Marlene asked if it was true. I told her no. She said she didn't think so. She asked if I wanted her to say something to Richard, to correct the record. I said no. I said thank you for telling me. I said I'd handle it. I hung up and sat very still. Then I opened my laptop and searched for private investigators who specialized in elder abuse cases. I hired a woman named Diana Chen, no relation to Richard. Diana ran background checks for estate attorneys, did asset searches for contested wills, specialized in documentation. I told her I needed to know what my son was saying about me to his professional network. I gave her a list of his business associates, his country club contacts, the clients I knew he worked with regularly. Diana called me 2 weeks later. She said she had recordings. She said I might want to be sitting down when I listened. I listened to Gerald explaining to a potential client that his mother had worked as a housekeeper her whole life, that she'd never really understood money, that he felt obligated to help her, but she was becoming difficult in her old age. I listened to him telling someone at his club that I called him constantly, that I was needy, that Vanessa was very patient, but it was putting strain on the marriage. I listened to him laughing, actually laughing, while he described me as a little confused these days to someone who asked if I'd be at his holiday party. Diana asked if I wanted her to confront him. I said no. I asked what she charged for court-ready documentation. She said she'd already prepared it, that this was the clearest elder abuse case she'd seen in 5 years. She said the recordings alone would destroy him in front of a judge. I paid her invoice. I added her documentation to my folder. The folder was getting thick. November arrived, Thanksgiving. Gerald called and invited me for dinner. He said Vanessa was cooking, that they'd love to have me. He said Paula was coming with her family. He said it would be nice to have everyone together. I drove to Westchester on Thanksgiving morning with 2 pies and the wooden box Samuel made for our wedding rings. The box sits on my nightstand next to the urn. Samuel carved it himself, spent weeks on it, made these little inlays of different woods that form a pattern like stars. I brought it because I wanted to see how Vanessa reacted to something that mattered to me. The house looked beautiful. Vanessa always makes everything look beautiful. White tablecloth, fresh flowers, candles. She hugged me at the door. She complimented my dress. She put my pies in the kitchen and said they looked delicious. Gerald hugged me too. He asked about my drive. He helped me with my coat. He was the perfect son in front of Paula and her husband and the kids. He pulled out my chair. He made sure my water glass stayed full. He smiled. The wooden box sat on the side table in the hallway where I left it with my purse. After dinner, while Vanessa served dessert, I saw her pick it up. She opened it. She looked at Samuel's wedding ring inside. She made a face like she'd smelled something sour. She put the box down and wiped her hands on a napkin. She didn't ask what it was. She didn't mention it. She just walked away from it like it was trash someone had left behind. I watched her do this. Paula watched her do this. Paula looked at me. I shook my head slightly. Paula's jaw tightened, but she stayed quiet. We finished dessert. We said goodbye. Gerald walked me to my car. He said it was nice to have me there. He said we should do this more often. He said he loved me. I drove home and called Josephine. I said I thought it might be time to act. She asked what changed. I said I was tired of waiting to see if he'd choose me. I said I already knew the answer. She asked if I was sure. She said once I started this, there was no taking it back. She said Gerald would be humiliated. She said Vanessa would file for divorce. She said the business relationships might crumble. She said I needed to be absolutely certain this was what I wanted. I told her about the wooden box, about Vanessa's face, about Gerald standing there watching her treat his father's memory like garbage and saying nothing. Josephine was quiet for a long time. Then she said she'd be ready when I was. She said to call her the minute I needed her. I said I would. I said I just needed one more piece to fall first. That piece fell in December. Gerald called on the 15th. He said they were having a Christmas Eve dinner party. He said Vanessa's parents were coming, some friends, some business associates. He said it would mean a lot to have me there. He said Vanessa specifically wanted me to come. I said I'd be there. He sounded relieved. He said he'd send me the details. He did. 20 people. Formal dinner. Black tie optional. I looked at the invitation and felt something settle in my chest. This was it. This was the stage. I called Josephine. I said I needed her to fly in from Chicago. I said I needed her to come to a Christmas Eve dinner in Westchester. I said I needed her to bring her reading glasses and her briefcase and her absolute best poker face. She said she'd book the flight. She asked if I was finally ready to execute. I said I was ready to give Gerald one last chance to see me. Really see me. And if he didn't, I was ready to make sure everyone else did. The box arrived on December 20th. FedEx. Signature required. I signed for it standing in my doorway in my bathrobe, morning coffee getting cold on the counter. The box was small. Light. The shipping label had Vanessa's handwriting. I recognized it from the birthday cards she used to send, back when Gerald still brought her to my house for Sunday dinners. I carried the box inside. I set it on my kitchen table. I looked at it for a full minute before I opened it. Inside was a plastic bag. Inside the plastic bag was ash. Gray ash mixed with what looked like vacuum debris. Coffee grounds. Something that might have been cat litter. And fragments of bone. There was a note. Also in Vanessa's handwriting. Didn't want to waste a good urn. I stood in my kitchen holding that bag. Holding what was left of my husband, mixed with garbage, shipped to me like something someone returns to a store because they changed their mind about the color. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I counted to 100 in Igbo. Then I counted to 100 in English. Then I called Josephine. She answered on the first ring. I said I needed her to fly in immediately. I said Christmas Eve wasn't soon enough. I said I needed her to come to Gerald's party, but I needed her to come now, today, so we could prepare. She said she'd be on the next flight. She asked if I was okay. I said no. She asked if I was safe. I said yes. She asked what happened. I told her. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, in a voice I'd never heard from her before, that she'd handled 300 elder abuse cases in 40 years, and this was the cruelest thing she'd ever heard. I said I needed to know if the memorial items clause in the trust would hold. I said I needed to know if a judge would agree that this constituted willful destruction. I said I needed to know if I could enforce the reversion. Josephine said any judge who wouldn't enforce it after seeing this evidence should be removed from the bench. She said the clause was clear. She said the evidence was overwhelming. She said I could reclaim the house, evict them both, and sue for damages if I wanted. I said I didn't want damages. I said I just wanted my house back, the house my money purchased, the house where my husband's memory was supposed to be honored, the house where my son chose a woman who shipped me garbage over his own mother. Josephine said she'd be there by evening. She said to keep the bag sealed. She said to photograph everything. She said we'd need documentation for the court. I photographed the box, the shipping label, the note, the bag. I photographed it all from multiple angles. I took video. I narrated what I was seeing so the timestamp would match the audio. Then I sealed everything in a freezer bag and put it in my safe deposit box. I wasn't taking any chances. Josephine arrived at 7 that night. She'd brought her entire litigation kit, the leather bag she only used for serious cases. We sat at my kitchen table. She reviewed the trust document again. She reviewed Diana's documentation. She reviewed the photographs of the ashes. Then she asked me to walk through exactly what I wanted to happen at the Christmas Eve dinner. I told her. She made notes. She asked clarifying questions. She pointed out potential complications. We worked through scenarios until midnight. At the end, she closed her notepad and looked at me. She said she needed to ask me something as my friend, not as my attorney. She asked if I was doing this out of anger or out of justice. I thought about that. I said I was angry. I said I was so angry I could barely sleep. I said I woke up every morning and remembered what Vanessa did, and I wanted to hurt them both the way they'd hurt me. But I said I was also clear. I said I knew exactly what this would do to Gerald's business, his marriage, his reputation. I said I knew it might destroy relationships I'd never get back. I said I was choosing to do it anyway because they'd already destroyed the relationship I thought we had. I said I spent 69 years being reasonable, being patient, being the bigger person. I raised 2 children alone while working nights. I built a career from nothing. I helped my son buy a house because I loved him. And he repaid me by lying about me, erasing me, letting his wife ship my husband back to me in a bag of trash. I said I was done being the bigger person. I was done waiting for him to see me. I was going to make sure he saw me, even if it meant he saw me as the person who took everything away. Josephine nodded. She said that was the right answer. She said anger alone wouldn't sustain me through what was coming, but anger plus clarity would. She said she'd stand with me through all of it. We reviewed the plan 3 more times. Then she went to her hotel, and I went to bed, and I didn't sleep at all. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. I dressed carefully. Not black tie, but elegant. The navy dress I wore to Samuel's funeral, pearl earrings, my mother's gold bracelet. I wanted to look like someone you took seriously. Josephine picked me up at 5. We drove to Westchester in silence. She parked down the street from Gerald's house. We sat in the car. She asked if I was ready. I said I'd been ready since August. I said I was just waiting for Gerald to give me a reason not to do this. I said he gave me a bag of trash instead. We walked to the house together. The windows glowed warm. I could see people inside, drinking wine, laughing. The perfect Christmas Eve gathering. The perfect life my money had purchased for my son. Vanessa answered the door. She looked stunning in a red dress. She hugged me. She hugged Josephine. She said something about how nice it was to finally meet Gerald's mother's friend. She said the friend thing like it was adorable that old ladies had friends. Gerald appeared behind her. He hugged me. He shook Josephine's hand. He said he was glad we could make it. He didn't mention that I'd asked if I could bring someone. He didn't ask why I'd need to bring my attorney to Christmas dinner. He was too busy playing host to his investors and Vanessa's parents and all the people he wanted to impress. We entered the living room. 18 people, maybe 20. I recognized some faces from Gerald's company website. Vanessa's parents held court by the fireplace. The house smelled like roasted meat and expensive candles. I looked around. The guest room was visible down the hallway. The door was open. I could see inside. New paint, new furniture. No trace of Samuel's urn. No trace that my husband had ever existed in this house. We sat for dinner. Gerald placed me near the end of the table, Josephine beside me. Vanessa's parents had the seats of honor. The meal was catered, beautiful, everything perfectly plated. Conversation flowed around me. People talked about their holiday plans, about the market, about their children's colleges. No one asked about me. No one asked what I did for a living. No one seemed to know I existed beyond being Gerald's elderly mother who needed accommodating. I waited. I ate my food. I smiled when appropriate. I kept my leather portfolio closed on the floor beside my chair. Dessert arrived, some complicated chocolate thing with gold leaf. Vanessa stood to thank everyone for coming. She talked about gratitude. She talked about clearing space for new beginnings. She talked about how she'd spent the year decluttering, getting rid of old energy, making room for the future. Then she mentioned the guest room. She said she'd finally cleared out that dusty urn that had been depressing the feng shui. She laughed. Some people laughed with her. She said it felt so good to let go of the past. Gerald said nothing. He looked uncomfortable, but he said nothing. I froze mid-bite. Josephine's hand touched my arm under the table. I set down my fork very carefully. Gerald caught my eye. He looked away quickly. He took a drink of wine. I excused myself. I said I needed the restroom. Vanessa waved toward the hallway. I walked past the guest room. I stopped at the doorway. I looked inside at the space where my husband's ashes had been. Then I went to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. I counted to 100 in Igbo, then English. Then I washed my hands and walked back to the table. I didn't sit down. I picked up my portfolio. I stood at my place. Everyone looked at me. The room got quiet. I said I had something to share. I said, since we were talking about clearing out things that didn't belong, I thought this was a good time to discuss the property deed to this house. Vanessa's smile froze. Gerald set down his wine glass. I opened the portfolio. I removed the trust document. I walked to Gerald's end of the table and placed it in front of him. I said that 6 years ago, when Gerald asked me to help him buy this house, I gave him $485,000. I said what I didn't give him was ownership. I said what I actually did was purchase the property through a revocable grantor trust with myself as trustee. Gerald started to interrupt. I held up my hand. I wasn't finished. I said the trust agreement contained specific conditions for continued beneficial interest. I said one of those conditions was respectful maintenance of memorial items belonging to my deceased spouse. I turned to Vanessa. I asked her if she remembered shipping me a package last week. She looked confused. She looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at his plate. I said I had the package with me. I'd left it in Josephine's car, but I could retrieve it if anyone wanted to see it. I said it contained my husband's ashes, mixed with vacuum debris and coffee grounds, with a note reading, "Didn't want to waste a good urn." Vanessa went pale. Someone gasped. Vanessa's mother made a sound like she'd been slapped. I said that according to Clause 14, subsection B of the trust agreement, Willful destruction or disposal of memorial items constituted material breach of trust conditions and triggered immediate reversion of all trust property to my estate. I looked at Gerald. I said that meant the house was mine again. I said the beneficial interest he'd held for 6 years was revoked as of the moment Vanessa sealed that box. Gerald found his voice. He said I couldn't do this. He said I gave him that money. He said the house was his. I said that was incorrect. I said the house was held in trust for his benefit contingent on meeting certain obligations. I said he'd failed to meet those obligations. I said the trust document was recorded with the county clerk. I said everything was legal, binding, and enforceable. One of Gerald's business partners asked if this was serious. Josephine stood. She introduced herself as an estate attorney. She said she'd reviewed the trust document and it was one of the most carefully drafted instruments she'd seen in 40 years of practice. She said every clause would hold up in court. Vanessa started crying. She said she didn't know. She said Gerald never told her the house was in a trust. She said he told her they owned it. Gerald said he thought it was just a formality. He said he didn't think I'd ever actually enforce anything. I asked him why he thought that. I asked him if he thought I was too stupid to write an enforceable trust. I asked him if he thought I was too confused to understand property law. I asked him if maybe he told himself I was just an old housekeeper who didn't understand how these things worked. The room was completely silent. I said I'd been examining property documents for fraud for 38 years. I said I'd caught $100,000 scams that other examiners missed. I said I knew exactly what I was doing when I wrote that trust, and I knew exactly what I was doing now by enforcing it. I said they had 60 days to vacate the property. I said I was exercising my reversionary interest effective immediately. I said I'd already filed the necessary paperwork with the court. I said the notice of eviction would be delivered within 3 business days. Gerald asked where they were supposed to go. I said that wasn't my concern. I said he was 44 years old and ran an investment firm. He should be able to figure it out. Vanessa's father stood up. He asked what kind of mother did this. He asked what kind of person pulled something like this at Christmas. I looked at him. I said the kind of person whose son lied to his business associates and said she worked as a housekeeper. The kind of person whose daughter-in-law removed her from her grandchildren's emergency contacts and called her confused. The kind of person who received her dead husband's ashes in a bag of garbage. I said his daughter did that. I said my son let her. I turned to Gerald. I asked him one question. I asked him if he read the note before Vanessa shipped that package. I asked him if he knew what she was sending me. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I closed my portfolio. I said Merry Christmas. I said Josephine and I were leaving. Vanessa tried to grab my arm. She said we could talk about this. She said she'd find the urn. She said she'd fix it. I asked her how she planned to fix ashes mixed with coffee grounds. I asked her how she planned to unwrite that note. I asked her how she planned to undo telling my son's business network that I had a gambling addiction. She looked shocked. She said she never said that. Gerald went pale. He knew I knew. I said I had recordings. I said I had documentation. I said I had everything I needed to prove systematic elder abuse and financial exploitation if they wanted to make this complicated. Josephine handed Gerald a business card. She said if he wanted to discuss terms for the eviction, he could contact her office. She said otherwise we'd proceed according to the trust document and state law. We walked out. Behind us, I heard shouting, Vanessa crying. Vanessa's mother demanding to know what was happening. Gerald trying to explain. We got in the car. Josephine drove 3 blocks before she pulled over and asked if I was all right. I said I didn't know. I said I felt like I'd just jumped off a cliff and I was still falling. She said I'd done the right thing. She said they'd left me no choice. She said she was proud of me. We drove back to my house. She came inside. We sat in my kitchen and drank tea and didn't talk about what had just happened. We talked about her grandchildren instead. About the book she was reading. About anything except the bomb I'd just detonated. She went back to her hotel at midnight. I sat in my kitchen alone. I looked at the wooden box on my table, the one Samuel made. I opened it and looked at his wedding ring. I said out loud, to the empty kitchen, that I'd done it. I said I'd protected his memory. I said I was sorry it came to this, but I didn't know what else to do. The ring didn't answer. The house was quiet. I went to bed at 2 a.m. and slept for 10 hours straight. Gerald called on December 26th. I didn't answer. He called again. I didn't answer. He sent a text asking if we could talk. I didn't respond. He sent an email. Long. Rambling. He said he understood I was angry. He said Vanessa made a mistake. He said they wanted to make it right. He said they could work something out. I forwarded the email to Josephine. She responded with a single line. Do not engage. I didn't engage. The eviction notice was delivered on December 28th. Gerald called from the office of his own attorney. His attorney asked if we could negotiate. Josephine said there was nothing to negotiate. The trust terms were clear. Breach had occurred. Reversion was automatic. Gerald's attorney asked about the recordings, about the elder abuse allegations. Josephine said those were separate matters we could pursue if necessary. She said we preferred not to, but we would if forced. Gerald's attorney said he'd advise his client to vacate peacefully. Vanessa filed for divorce on January 2nd. I found out from Paula, who heard it from Gerald's sister-in-law. The divorce filing cited irreconcilable differences. What it actually cited, according to Paula, was that Gerald had 0 assets. The house was mine. The investment accounts Gerald thought he controlled were in trust structures I'd helped him set up years ago, with me as beneficiary. The car was leased in my name because Gerald asked me to co-sign, and I'd written the lease to protect myself. Vanessa had insisted on a prenup when they married. She'd wanted to protect her family money from Gerald's business risks. The prenup protected Gerald's assets in case of divorce. But Gerald had no assets. Everything was mine or held in trust. Vanessa's attorney discovered this during disclosure. Vanessa's parents discovered it when she came home and told them she'd left a marriage with less than she'd entered it. I learned all this through Paula, who talked to Gerald's colleague's wife, who heard it from someone else. I didn't talk to Gerald directly. He tried. He called. He sent emails. He showed up at my house on January 15th. I didn't answer the door. He stood on my porch and shouted through the door that he was sorry, that he didn't know Vanessa would do something so cruel, that he should have protected me. I stood on the other side of the door and listened to him apologize to Wood. He said he loved me. He said he was my son. He said he made mistakes, but he didn't deserve this. I opened the door. He stopped mid-sentence. I asked him one question. I asked him when he stopped calling me Mama. He looked confused. I said he used to call me Mama until he was about 25. Then it became Mom. Then it became Mother on formal occasions. I asked him when I stopped being Mama. He said he didn't remember. He said it didn't matter what he called me. I said it mattered to me. I said when he called me Mama, I felt like his mother. When he called me Mother, I felt like an obligation. I said he'd been treating me like an obligation for 6 years. I said he'd been managing me, not loving me. I said he'd let a woman who'd been in his life for 3 years override the woman who'd raised him alone for 44. He said Vanessa didn't override me. He said he made his own choices. I said exactly. I said he chose to lie about my career. He chose to let me be removed from my grandchildren's emergency contacts. He chose to say nothing when his wife mocked my husband's memory at a dinner party. He chose. I said I chose too. I chose to enforce a contract he signed. I chose to protect myself the same way he'd been protecting himself from me. He asked what I meant. I showed him the refinance documents he'd sent in September. I asked him to explain Clause 17, the subordination agreement. He said his attorney drafted that. He said it was standard. He said he didn't understand all the legal language. I said his attorney drafted language that would have eliminated my trust interest and left me with no recourse if he defaulted. I said he understood enough to try to get me to sign it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked what I wanted from him. I said I wanted my house back. I said I wanted him out by February 15th. I said if he stayed longer, I'd pursue the full legal remedies available to me, including damages. He said he didn't have anywhere to go. He said Vanessa left him. He said his reputation was destroyed. He said some of his clients were asking questions about the house situation, about whether his business assets were actually his. I said that sounded like consequences. I said I lived with consequences for 40 years after his father died. I said I figured it out. I said he would too. He asked if I'd ever forgive him. I said I didn't know. I said I was 69 years old and I didn't have time to wait around finding out. I said he could start by moving out on time and leaving my house in the same condition he received it. He left my porch. I closed the door. I watched through the window as he sat in his car for 20 minutes before driving away. Paula called that night. She'd heard about the confrontation from Gerald. She asked if I was okay. I said I was tired. She asked if I wanted her to come over. I said no. She asked what she could do. I said she could help me scatter her father's ashes. I said I'd been holding on to them for 8 years, and it was time to let him rest somewhere beautiful. We drove to Lake Champlain in February. Paula brought her kids. We stood by Samuel's favorite fishing spot, the place he'd taken the kids every summer before he died. The ice was breaking up. The sun was setting. Paula's youngest grandson asked if Grandpa liked it here. I said Grandpa loved anywhere we were together. I said that was his gift, finding home in people instead of places. We opened the container I'd been keeping in my safe deposit box. The ashes I'd saved from the bag Vanessa sent, the ones I could separate from the garbage. It wasn't all of him. Most of him was gone. But it was something. We scattered what we had. The wind caught it and carried it over the water. Paula cried. The kids asked questions. I told them about their grandfather, about how he carved wood and studied stars and loved them before they were born. We drove home in the dark. Paula asked if I was moving into Gerald's house. I said yes. She asked why I wanted it after everything that happened there. I said because it was mine. I said I paid for it. I said Samuel's money and my work bought that house, and I wasn't going to let what Gerald and Vanessa did to it erase that. I said I was going to turn the guest room into a memorial space. I said I was going to fill it with Samuel's photos and his books and his fishing rods. I said I was going to make it into the place it should have been all along. Paula asked if I'd let Gerald visit. I said maybe, eventually, if he earned it. Gerald moved out on February 14th. He hired movers. He didn't ask me to help. He left the house clean. He left the keys on the kitchen counter with a note. The note said he was sorry. It said he understood why I did what I did. It said he hoped someday I'd give him a chance to be my son again, instead of someone I had to protect myself from. I read the note standing in the empty kitchen. Then I folded it and put it in the wooden box Samuel made, next to his wedding ring. I moved into the house in March. Paula helped me. We painted the guest room together. We hung photos of Samuel. We put his fishing rods on wall mounts. We shelved his astronomy books. We placed the wooden box on the dresser. The room looks like a memory now, like proof that someone existed and mattered and was loved. I sleep in the master bedroom. I wake up in the house my money bought. I drink coffee in the kitchen where Vanessa once served catered dinners. I garden in the yard where Gerald used to play as a child, before this house existed, in the memory of the life we had. Some of Gerald's former clients called me. They wanted to verify his business claims. They wanted to know if the investment properties he'd described were real. I told them the truth. I told them everything he'd claimed to own was either mine or held in trust. I told them to verify all asset claims independently. His business took a hit. Some clients left. His reputation in the investment community suffered. I heard about it through Paula, who heard it from Gerald. I didn't feel good about it. I didn't feel bad either. I felt clear. Josephine came to visit in April. She walked through the house. She stood in the memorial room and looked at the photos of Samuel. She said he would have been proud of me. She said she was proud of me. She said most people in my situation never fought back. She said most people believed they had to accept how their children treated them because family was family. She said I'd shown my son that love had to be mutual to matter. I asked her if she thought I was cruel. She said no. She said I was clear. She said there was a difference. She said she'd handled 300 elder abuse cases in 40 years. She said mine was the one where the elder had protected themselves before the abuse could destroy them. She said most people waited until they'd lost everything to ask for help. I'd made sure there was nothing to lose. I asked her if Gerald would ever understand. She said probably not completely. She said people who feel entitled to your generosity rarely understand it when you stop giving. She said that wasn't my problem to solve. She said my job was to live the rest of my life with dignity. She said I'd earned that. I think about that conversation a lot. About dignity. About what it means to protect yourself from people you love. I've learned some things in 69 years. I've learned that generosity without boundaries doesn't create gratitude, it creates entitlement. I've learned that you can love someone completely and still need to protect yourself from them. I've learned that family doesn't mean accepting abuse because you share blood. I've learned that the people who dismiss you as old or confused or irrelevant are usually the ones depending on you the most. They need you to be less than you are, so they can be more than they've earned. I've learned that documentation matters, that contracts matter, that protecting yourself legally isn't cynical, it's necessary. I spent 38 years catching fraud in property documents. The biggest fraud I caught was almost the one committed against me by my own son. I've learned that there's a specific kind of peace that comes from stopping something before it destroys you. Gerald could have taken everything if I'd signed those refinance papers. Vanessa could have erased Samuel completely if I'd stayed quiet. But I didn't sign and I didn't stay quiet. And now I live in a house that remembers my husband and I sleep without fear. Gerald sends cards sometimes. Birthday, Mother's Day. He doesn't call. He doesn't visit. The cards are polite, generic. He signs them, your son, Gerald. Not love, Gerald. Not mama. Just your son. I keep them in a box in the guest room. Someday maybe we'll rebuild something. Someday maybe he'll understand that I didn't take his house. I reclaimed mine. That I didn't punish him for choosing his wife. I protected myself from their joint decision to treat me as disposable. But that's someday. Today I'm 69 years old, and I live in a house I paid for. I have a room dedicated to the man I loved for 33 years before his heart gave out in our kitchen. I have a daughter who calls me twice a week, and grandchildren who know my name and ask me questions about their grandfather. I have my hands. I have my mind. I have documentation proving I'm exactly as competent as I've always been. And I have the knowledge that when my family decided I was too old to matter, I showed them exactly how much I'd always mattered. When they tried to erase me from emergency contacts and property titles and their version of family history, I produced the documents proving I was the foundation everything was built on. Studies show that financial abuse of elders by family members is increasing. More than 5 million older adults experience financial exploitation each year, with losses exceeding billions. Adult children are the most common perpetrators, using emotional manipulation and assumed authority to access assets while undermining the elder's autonomy. Research also indicates that elders who establish clear legal protections before relationships deteriorate are significantly more likely to maintain their financial security and housing stability. Trusts, documented agreements, and recorded property interests serve as protection when verbal promises fail. The truth is that generosity becomes exploitation the moment the recipient stops seeing it as a gift and starts seeing it as an entitlement. The moment your support becomes invisible. The moment they assume it will always be there without gratitude or respect. The question isn't whether you should protect yourself from your own children. The question is why we've been taught that protecting yourself from family is betrayal instead of wisdom. I know what I am. I'm a woman who worked nights so her children could sleep safely, who studied law books at 3 in the morning, who examined property documents until her eyes burned, who caught frauds worth millions, who raised 2 children alone after her husband died at 43. I'm also a woman who wrote a trust document that protected her interests because she knew that love and legal protection aren't opposites. A woman who documented abuse before it could destroy her. A woman who enforced boundaries when manipulation failed. I'm a woman who scattered her husband's ashes by his favorite lake 8 years after he died because her son's wife shipped those ashes to her in a bag of trash. And I'm a woman who took back the house she paid for, who lives surrounded by proof of the life she built, who sleeps peacefully knowing she protected herself before it was too late. I don't know if Gerald will ever be my son again in the way he was when he called me mama. I don't know if we'll ever have Sunday morning phone calls or family dinners without lawyers present. But I know this. I'm 69 years old, and I live in my own house, and nobody can take that from me. I documented it, I protected it, I enforced it, and that's worth more than any relationship built on my silence. Where are you listening from? What would you have done? Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone you raised, someone you loved, someone who should have protected you? I'd like to know, because I think there are more of us than we admit. More people who gave everything and watched it get treated like nothing. More people who were dismissed by the children they sacrificed for. If that's you, I want you to know something. Documenting your generosity isn't cruel. Protecting your assets isn't selfish. Enforcing boundaries isn't betrayal. It's survival. And you deserve to survive with dignity. Leave a comment if this resonated. Share if you know someone who needs to hear it. And if you're going through something similar, talk to an estate attorney before you sign anything. Before you give anything else. Before you let anyone convince you that protecting yourself makes you the bad guy. You're not the bad guy for refusing to be the victim. You're just someone who finally understood their worth.